Welcome to Shaping the NYC Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, David Shamshovich, and I'm here with my co-host,
Brenda Slukowski.
Hello to all of our Skyliners. It's David Shamshovich from Seiden Schein, and we're here with our resident guru on tax incentives, Jason Hershkowitz, who's a partner at Seiden Schein. Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, Jason has been hard at work crafting a memo that I've heard people call absolutely brilliant, that describes precisely what the new program is, what the options are, where they apply, and really sets forth all the nitty-gritty details. That doesn't spell the whole story, though. That doesn't tell the whole story, rather. The whole story is what we're about to tell you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody to Jason Hershkowitz.
Thank you, David, for that very, very generous introduction.
All true.
Except that you're not really introducing me for the first time. Maybe on video.
Yes, that's right. We started video, so now this is a three-peater for you, Jason.
Yes, yeah.
You know why this is a three-peater for you, though? Because there's been so much news in the tax incentive space. Because this thing is moving so quickly, and it's so important that we had to have you on for a third time. We don't even need to talk about your background, which is impressive in and of itself, because we want to get our Skyliners the story.
Obviously, most important thing is making sure our listeners are up to date with all the news and all the happenings. And it's been exciting few weeks in the field.
I bet your phone has been ringing off the hook nonstop since the Saturday when they signed it.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It's been a busy time, but good and happy to be back both on the podcast and also back with a new tax incentive program.
And we love to have you. We're very excited about the program. We're going to dive right in momentarily. But the reason that Seiden Schein has been particularly silent on this topic, and there are others that are coming out, is because we've been tirelessly working to make sure that we understand all the nooks and crannies so that we can answer all of your nitty-gritty questions. And what Jason is about to give you is a story about what the program is like and all the things that he's basically learned in the last couple of weeks from having read through it. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Let's give our audience some understanding of this new program, which is called 485X. So I'm gonna have to get used to that a little bit.
Yeah, affordable neighborhoods for New Yorkers.
Yeah.
It's depending on the size and location of the project, the actual developer does not matter. But depending upon the size and location of the project, that's going to dictate what type of affordability requirements apply.
Yeah.
Correct.
So how many options are there and what
Sure.
are they?
So there are technically 4 options. I'm going to refrain from calling them options, different from the previous program where you might have a single project that could qualify for 6 different options without changing a thing about it. The new program, while they are called options, don't take that to mean that you have a choice. If you have a project of a certain size in a certain location, there is an option that applies to you, and that is your only option. So there are 4 of them. One of them is kind of split into 2 depending on location, but we'll get into all that. Let's start with small rental projects. That's the first option, and it is applicable to projects between 6 and 10 dwelling units. And but the kicker here is outside of Manhattan, and it must be on a zoning lot that permits a residential floor area of 12,500 square feet or less.
Yeah, so pretty small projects.
Right. The universe of these types of projects may be small, but the interesting part of a small rental project is that there are no affordability requirements. The requirement is that at least 50% of the units are rent stabilized. So they went in a different direction for these smaller projects. Still eligible for a benefit, but no affordability.
What would the initial rents look like? Are there restrictions there?
Yeah, so there are no restrictions in the statute. So presumably the first rent will be a market rent, whatever you can get. But then going forward, you would be rent stabilized, and similar to all of the options that exist now, the restrictions are permanent. So we're talking about permanent rent stabilization in these cases.
What about the other 50% that are market rate? Are those also going to be rent stabilized?
No, so the units that don't count towards these 50% will be exempt from rent stabilization. And unlike the previous iteration of the tax incentives that we all know, there's no high rent threshold that you need to worry about here. Any rent will do. Any market rate unit is exempt from stabilization. So the application fee always under 421A applies to all units, whether they're restricted units or market rate units. So
That's right. I'm glad you reminded me about that.
in the case of a small rental project, the fee is $3,000 per dwelling unit, all units. And that's the same fee that applied under the previous program.
Yeah, and it's a one-time fee that you pay, and that's it. You're in.
That is correct. I will say there's an interesting possibility in the new statute. So if everyone remembers 421A, you would need to file what was called a 421A workbook before you begin the marketing process. And this new statute allows HPD to actually collect a portion of the fee when you start your marketing. So I take that to mean when the workbook gets filed. It's possible that HPD can collect a fee. We'll see with the rules. We don't have rules yet.
Yeah.
So with all these programs, it comes to HPD to adopt rules to administer how the program is going to work, how the application process is going to work. So there's still some unknowns out there because we have to wait for HPD to adopt their rules.
How different do you think the rules that pertain to the prior expired 420 program will be to these new rules? How similar do you think they'll be?
I think in a lot of cases they'll be pretty similar. A lot of the language in this statute is the same as the previous statute when it comes to proportionality, the requirement that the affordable units be in a mix proportional to the market rate units, that all units have access to the same entrances and common areas. All that language is the same.
Yeah.
So I would suspect that, at least in that respect, the rules will be similar, if not exact. There are new requirements for the new program. One of them being a requirement to make a good effort to hire MWBEs, minority women-owned business enterprises.
And that's applicable to any project, no matter the size?
That is applicable to all projects, no matter the size. So there will be new rules that will be needed to see how these new requirements are going to take effect. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of the rules that existed will still exist under the new program.
So the old program had a requirement that you couldn't have more than 70% affordable units on any given floor.
Correct.
But there was no vertical distribution requirement.
That is correct.
Do you suspect that will change?
Again, the language in the statute is the same, and HPD, with respect to 421A projects, have been using the same rules for a very long time. So I can't say it's impossible, but I would be surprised if the rules with respect to that change.
Understood.
Yeah, for sure. The next option we're going to talk about, which is a modest rental project, also applies to projects with 6 units or more, up to 99.
Yeah.
So the projects that are small rental projects, those are the only types of projects that may also be eligible for as a modest rental project.
So
And that's the only instance where you might have a choice. So a modest rental project is between 6 and 99 dwelling units. There is an affordability requirement here, and that's that 20% of the units are affordable at a weighted average of 80% of AMI or less. And so you can do up to 3 AMI tiers, but no tier can be more than 100% of AMI.
Yeah.
But also the 20% and 80% is similar to just voluntary inclusionary in designated areas.
Yeah.
You know, so that's an amount and an AMI tier that we're all familiar with.
What's interesting enough is that the 421A requirement is based on 20% of the units, and mandatory inclusionary housing, I guess the upcoming universal affordability preference will not be in terms of unit, but it'll be in terms of floor area.
Right.
Why they haven't really made them the same is probably the same answer why they called it moderate.
So the hope going forward, though, is that your architect will be able to satisfy both programs with the exact same units, even though one deals in square footage and one deals with the number of units.
So I think one of the things that we skipped over in terms of the small project, so I want to turn back to it, is the level of affordability, the actual benefit that you're getting.
Right. Small rental projects have a duration of benefit of 10 years. and that would be 10 years at 100% of all increases in assessed value from the value before you commence construction. All these options also come with a construction period benefit, which is the same as 421A has always had. And in a small rental project, it would be 3 years.
Yeah.
So a 3-year construction period benefit, and then 10 years post-construction. A modest rental project actually mirrors the benefit of Affordable New York, the previous 421A program. 35 years, 25 years at 100%, and then the last 10 years at the affordability percentage. So the percentage of the project that is affordable. In this case, with a modest rental project, it would be about 20%.
Yeah. The prior program did not have an MWB requirement.
That's right.
ICAP does, which is Industrial Commercial Abatement Program, which is the commercial equivalent of 421A or 485X. We're just going to have to get used to that.
Yeah.
What was the push here, and then how is that requirement going to be different from what you have under ICAP currently?
Sure. So I think when ICAP first started, many years ago, they then put in a requirement to solicit at least 3 bids from MWBs. And that was one of the earliest pushes to get some MWBE participation in construction work going around the city. Since then, many of the new programs that are implemented in the city and even statewide have an MWBE component. And most of the time, there is a requirement to make a good faith effort for MWBE participation, not just solicitation. So I would expect with this program also, I would expect the requirements to be more stringent than just needing to solicit MWBs. I think they really want to see a really strong effort to get MWBE participation in the project. The requirement that's listed in the statute is reasonable efforts to enter into contracts with MWBE for 25% of the project's design and construction costs. So again, I think some of the nuts and bolts will come out in the rules, but I think we can be sure that solicitation on its own will not be sufficient. Once you hit 100 units, the construction wage requirements start to kick in. For projects, generally speaking, for projects with 100 units or more, there's a minimum wage of $40 per hour. Applies to construction workers. It's a pretty broad definition of construction workers, laborers, things that take place before the commencement of construction would not count. And it's possible that it really is for construction work, so it's for people adding to the value of the building.
Yeah. What was there some similar requirement under the old program?
So there was a similar requirement under the old program, although it did not apply to many projects. So under the old program, projects with 300 units or more that were located in certain areas called enhanced affordability areas, which were basically Manhattan south of 96th Street and then the waterfront of Brooklyn and Queens. Those were the enhanced affordability areas. If you had a project of 300 or more units in those areas, you had a minimum average hourly wage. So also slightly different because that was an average wage, whereas here we're talking about a straight minimum wage.
Yeah.
But it only applied to projects of 300 units or more, and there weren't, if I'm being honest, there weren't too many that this applied to.
How do they enforce this requirement, and what do you suggest generally to our developer clients to ensure that their records are tidy and neat and clear so that they don't get in trouble with anyone who's auditing it?
Right. So it's going to be the comptroller's office that enforces this part of the program. It's really about keeping good payroll and making sure your contractors keep good payroll records and payroll reports, and that they are submitted timely and reviewed timely. Under the previous program, it was really laid out in the statute and of how this construction wage monitoring was going to go. There isn't as much language to that effect in 485X. It's really being left up to the comptroller and the comptroller's rules as to how these wage requirements are going to be enforced. But being familiar with it from the previous program, just again making sure that all the payroll reports are collected and kept on file, and that it's being reviewed to make sure that all of the wages are being hit. What you don't want to do is one, wait until a contractor is finished with their work, or wait until the project's done to try to begin collecting all this and making sure everything is okay. That's when you get yourself in trouble. Following along throughout the entire process really is the key to making sure that you're going to meet the requirement.
Just going back to the modest projects, are there any restrictions in location like you have with small rental projects which cannot be within Manhattan?
Modest projects, there are no geographic restrictions. So any project anywhere 99 units or less, you can be a modest rental project. And I think we went over the duration of benefit schedule: 35 years, 25 years at 100%, and then 10 years at the affordability.
Similar to the prior program.
Correct.
What does the option there look like, and what's the benefit that you get?
Right. So we're talking about projects that are 100 units or more. Again, there's no geographic limitations. However, which we'll get into shortly, when you have projects of 150 units or more located in certain areas, you get forced into a different option. But generally speaking, projects of 100 units or more are eligible as a large rental project. And as we talked about just before, the big kicker here is that this is when construction wages are going to start kicking in. So large rental projects have a construction wage of $40 an hour. The affordability requirements here are 25% of the units at a weighted average of 80% of AMI. So same AMI tier as a modest rental project, but 5% more of your units. So, I mean, it is pretty interesting that you can build a 99 unit project and need 20%. You add one unit on top of that, all of a sudden 5% more of your units need to be affordable.
Gotta have a threshold, right?
Yeah, duration of benefits for large rental projects is 35 years at 100% of an exemption. So a little bit better than a modest rental, because the final 10 years the exemption percentage does not get reduced.
Yeah, but at the same time, people are generally not thinking 20 years ahead.
Right.
So I'm not sure how much that will prompt developers to fall within this option versus the other one, because in the front end they're getting this extreme benefit.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. The modest option, all these
it's going to be popular.
Yeah, the modest option.
It will be a popular option, that is for sure.
And then for rent stabilization, again, you have the same requirements, which is all the 420 affordable units are rent stabilized permanently.
Permanently, that's right. It's important, actually, big difference. We tend to glance over this a little bit because we deal so much in an MIH and inclusionary scenario as well, where under MIH and inclusionary, the units were permanently affordable to begin with. But a big change from the prior program to 485X is that all of these restricted units, the affordable units in this case, or the rent stabilized units in a small rental project, are permanently restricted.
Yeah, I mean, just, if you're doing a project doesn't qualify for inclusionary housing or MIH, or when the city of Yes goes through UAP, which is going to expand the areas where you can get a zoning bonus, this won't be too much of an issue for you, because you're probably going to have to comply with, you're going to have to comply with the affordability requirements for those programs. And so it's going to overlap majorly, and more than likely your MIH options are going to require you to do lower AMIs, or at least average AMIs. So I assume they picked a lot of the stuff so that it would fit nicely, although I kind of question why they didn't fit it more nicely, but I don't think they're thinking about MIH and IH like I am, which is because it's a constant for me to think about that and how it relates to 421A. But I'm very happy that this is back, because then MIH is back without 485X. MIH doesn't exist. So hopefully none of the hiccups, like the wage requirements or other MW requirements, create enough of a hiccup for developers not to build. I suspect not. I suspect that developers will find a way through this rubric. If it wasn't, I don't think they would have found a way.
Right.
This rubric, I think many developers will find a way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, is it going to produce the same amount of housing as a previous program? I mean, we have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But I think that this is incentive enough to at least kickstart the development again, and I think we're going to see plenty of projects put up.
So I mean, I'm going to get to the application process and things like that, when you can apply, and also the extension of the completion deadline. But before that, I might as well just hit that last topic, right?
Sure.
The very appropriately named, very large, I would just call it an extra large, like my shirts, extra large rental projects. So why don't you go into those? And
So under the very large rental project name, there are two types of projects. Once you hit 150 units or more and you're in zones A or B, you then go out of the large rental project name, and now you're a very large project. So again, only applies 150 units or more in these two zones, zones A or B. The zones are pretty similar to the enhanced affordability areas under the previous program, just expanded. So we're talking Manhattan South and 96th Street, and again, Brooklyn and Queens on the waterfront, but just more of it.
There's like high cost areas. Is that really the ticket
Right.
there?
I mean, that's the idea, is that these are the highest rental value areas in the city, and so
Like Williamsburg, Greenpoint.
correct, Long Island City, those areas are going to fall in. The affordability requirement will also be 25%, but now the average AMI is reduced from 80% to 60% of AMI. So 25% of your units affordable at 60% of AMI. So the AMIs go down, the construction wages go up. So when you're in Zone B, there's a minimum wage of $63 an hour, or it's really the lesser of $63 an hour, or 60% of the prevailing wage for a particular trade. The $63 an hour, and actually going back to $40 an hour under large projects, that increases starting July 1st, 2025, and every year thereafter it's going to increase by 2.5%. The $63 an hour is actually pretty close to what the minimum average hourly wage was under Affordable New York under the previous program. So that wage is pretty similar.
Yeah.
When you get to Zone A, which are even, I would say, the highest rental areas in the city, so Manhattan South and 96th Street, and then really the main Brooklyn waterfront, the minimum wage jumps up to $72.45 per hour, or 65% of the prevailing wage. So the lesser of those two numbers.
Yeah, that's pretty high. Those are pretty high numbers.
Very large projects come with a 40-year benefit period, so an increased benefit period, a longer benefit period. One of the differences between zones A and B, Zone B has a 3-year construction period benefit, which is similar to all the other options, but Zone A very large projects actually get a 5-year construction period benefit, and that 5-year construction period benefit is a 100% exemption, which is unlike any other.
You're saying 100% exemption, meaning you're not even paying on the current value of the property without the improvements?
Correct. There's no mini tax, as we like to say. It's just a 100% exemption.
And then, is that the only version or only quote unquote option that occurs in?
That is, yes.
Interesting. So it's like, that occurs in both Zone A and B, right?
Yeah, it's correct. It's Zone A and B. Part of it comes down to a longer, possibly a longer construction period and a more expensive construction period. So this is kind of just a better benefit to go along with it.
And then for the 40 years, which is obviously a very long benefit, 5 years longer than the 35-year benefit, it's the mini tax does kick in, but you have 100% exemption on increased. And then we have another kind of not really that essential or interesting homeownership option. Why don't you just run through some of the homeownership options and how that works?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the homeownership option is slightly improved from the previous version, but really not what we were hoping for. Going back historically, and actually in the governor's proposal from earlier in this year, not the one that got adopted, but one of the governor's previous proposals, the option for home ownership was a percentage of the units at a percentage of AMI, which is historically what condo and co-op availability was. It wasn't until the most recent program, Affordable New York, where all of a sudden they switched eligibility to a post-construction assessed value test, which it's right there in the name. It's post-construction. You don't know what your assessed value is going to be when you develop the project. You won't know until you complete it. And so it's not something you can rely on in the development phase, and it's not something you can have your purchasers rely on because you don't know if it's going to be available. So the same type of test applies now. It's going to be a post-construction average assessed value of $89 per square foot. So I think it's better than the previous program because the previous program had a limit of $65,000 per unit, and it didn't matter the size. It was just $65,000 per unit. So now at least the assessed value is based on the square footage of a unit. So it makes it probably a little bit easier to qualify. Also, they no longer limit homeownership availability to projects of 35 units or less. So more projects can be eligible for it. I just think that the way they implement eligibility is very difficult, and it's going to be, it's like I said, it's hard to know when you start a project whether or not you're going to be eligible.
You're saying that previously they had limited it to 35 units for homeownership, but now there is no limit.
There's no limit.
You just have to have six. Six is the
Right.
the floor.
Six
right?
is always the minimum, but also keep in mind that if you build very large projects, the same construction wage requirements apply to home ownership projects as they do rentals. So if you're gonna have a home ownership project of 100 units or more, you're gonna have some sort of construction wage requirement.
Yeah, I mean that's important to keep in mind. Plus, you have to have some kind of crystal ball, or at least bring on somebody to do some projections to figure out.
I mean, there certainly are projects where you'll probably have a good idea that you're going to come out with an assessed value depending on the location and what type of building it's going to be. But it's just, to me, it's unfortunate because I think it's a real missed opportunity.
I think so too, because maybe homeownership is not as big of an agenda for the policymakers and those that are they're making law and policy in New York City, because it's owning apartments versus making sure that rentals are kicked out. But there is something to say about homeownership, affordable land, and not market rate, because owning a home there's nothing kind of quite like it.
I'm sure there's lots of renters out there who want to buy a home, and if they could buy a home, they would get out of that rental unit, and it would increase the stock of rental units in the city overall, which is one of the goals. So it doesn't make sense to me that home ownership projects have really in the last 10 years or so, I don't know, it's been hard to get any tax incentives on home ownership.
I think some of the off-site affordable housing, or what was labeled as a poor door like scenario you mentioned earlier, that one of the requirements that all the units have to share a primary entrance. There's a reason for that, right? Because inclusionary housing, right, is called inclusionary. You're including them, and affordable, the NNY program or 485X, whatever you want to call it. Similarly, you want to include those people. You can't. Is what created this 100% AMI cap.
Right.
On nothing, you can't have any units that are greater than 100% AMI that qualify for 45X.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like probably was a mistake, and I mean, I don't mind seeing it corrected in this version.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, many people didn't even go with that option, and they probably ended up going with 100% AMI or less. So for homeownership, what are the benefits under that option?
Yeah, sure. So homeownership is a 20-year benefit period. First 14 years are 100%. And then it drops down to a 25% exemption following that. The restriction period there is 20 years. So this is the only thing that is not, quote, I guess, permanently restricted. One of the big requirements in a homeownership project is that purchasers agree to maintain the unit as their primary residence for at least 5 years. Yeah. So, they can't be investment properties, and they can't be rented out. The hundreds of affordable New York projects we've had, we've participated in 3 homeownership projects. One went forward and got their benefits. One decided that 35 units was too small and decided to bump it up, and thereby making themselves ineligible. And the third constructed, wanted to apply, but ended up with a post-construction average assessed value of just over the $65,000 limit. So that kicked them out of the game. They are currently protesting their taxes to see if they can get it dropped down below, but unless they do, the project's not eligible. So it's just a cliff that you fall over, and you're no longer eligible. So
it's very interesting, because those 3 projects are kind of representative of the 3 likely scenarios. Those that go in, those that kind of get screwed over because of the post-construction requirement, and then the third are like, we're just not gonna.
Yeah,
it's not gonna work.
It's almost like a home ownership project gets built, and then they wake up at the end and they're like, oh, I think we're eligible for 45X, but you can't plan on it, and I think that's an issue.
Yeah, I think it's going to be similar. We're not going to see a ton of those. We don't see a lot of inclusionary housing or mandatory inclusionary housing homeownership, because there's just a lot of complexity involved, and a lot of people don't want to do it. And as you can see, the city's more or less discouraging it, even though it's creating it as an option.
Agreed.
So I mean, those are all the options. You have those options that are obviously applicable to geographic limitations, sizes, and then the wage requirements, plus the MWB requirements, which are huge. So now, what are the next steps? I want to participate in 485X. Mm-hmm. If I have a footing in the ground for 421A for the prior program, can Can I get the benefits of this program?
So the program as it's written now has no opt-in ability. So as you were saying, under Affordable New York, projects that had commenced under the prior program had the ability to elect to comply with Affordable New York. That possibility does not exist under the current statute. So if you had put in a footing, you rushed to get a footing in under the Affordable New York program, but happened to like 45X better. Fortunately, though, you would not be able to opt in. The only scenario where I could see it being possible is if you have a voluntary inclusionary housing project of fewer than 100 units, because that is going to require 20 units, affordable units or less, 20% affordable or less, whereas Affordable New York required 25 to 30% affordable.
Yeah, that's right.
So in that scenario, you may have wanted to have the new program, but unfortunately, there's no ability to opt in.
So there isn't. But good news for all of you that qualified and had your footing in the ground and they've extended that completion deadline for how many years?
Correct. So they've extended that completion deadline for 5 years to June 15th of 2031. And we already know lots of projects that are excited to hear that and are going to be utilizing that extension, including lots of Gowanus projects.
Yep. And everybody's just bailing out of
ESDs. It's looking that way. I think it was a great idea, and it would have been a great program had 485X or this extension not come around. But that program requires some hoops to jump through that just are unnecessary now with the extension and the new program. So the extension, though, to utilize the extension, though, it does come with 2 additional requirements. One is that affordability options C and G, which under the Affordable New York program were the 30% of your units at 130% of AMI options. So those were the options that were frowned upon. Those are not permitted to be used if you're going to utilize the extension.
I mean, shocker, right? I mean, if they went that if the legislature had a hit list, I think 130% AMI would be number one.
I think we all saw the writing on the wall with that one. Luckily for the Gowanus projects, which are all mandatory inclusionary with stricter affordability anyway, this has no effect. The other requirement is that you have to file a letter of intent with HPD, letting them know about your intention to use the program.
The expired 420 program.
Correct, the expired 421A program. And so there are timing requirements that are with that. HPD is supposed to release the letter of intent within 60 days of the enactment of the statute, which was April 20th. And then once HPD releases that form, projects have 90 days to file that letter of intent. So if you want to use that extension, that you got to see, make sure you ask us for the letter of intent and make sure that it gets filed so that you don't lose the ability to use that extension.
So is that a drop dead date if you don't file it within that 90-day period?
Yeah, that's a statutory date. So unlike
another hurdle.
Unlike other things where HPD can possibly waive, this is statutory.
I think we here and the city in general, especially developers and people who are interested in making sure housing gets built, are very pumped for this, even though it's not the best outcome. It's still a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, all things considered, I think it's a pretty good outcome for the development community. I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I'm excited to see it.
Same here. And so for the completion deadline, you can't really formally move forward until you file that letter of intent. Once it's been filed with HPD, and what are the next steps in terms of proceeding with 420? What would you necessarily do after that?
Sure. So going back to the old program, the typical procedure is that about a year, depending on the project size of the project, about a year prior to completion, you file a 421A workbook so that you can begin your marketing. The workbook just designates what the affordable units are, where they're located.
And their rents and their AMI levels, right?
Right, what the AMI levels are.
And the utilities, I assume, also.
Right, so that factors into the rents, what utilities the tenants will be responsible for. So that gets filed with HPD so that you can begin your marketing process and the HPD lottery. And then once you complete construction, that's when you can file the application itself. And both 421A and 485X have a 1-year filing deadline. So within a year of getting a TCO for all of your residential dwelling units, you want to file this application.
Yeah. So another deadline to keep in mind, not different from
Yeah.
what was before, obviously.
While we're speaking of deadlines, there are actually two added deadlines in 485X. So the first added deadline is that if you have a construction wage requirement, so projects of 100 units or more, you are supposed to notify the comptroller and HPD 30 days prior to commencement of construction, what your project is. And obviously this is so that they can get a handle on which projects have the construction wages requirement and which projects need to be monitored. The second filing under 485X, and this is for all projects, is that within 6 months of commencement of construction, you are supposed to basically file a registration with HPD, which I suspect to be fairly simple, probably form, commencement date, etc., so that HPD knows that you're a 485X project. So unlike the previous program where there was no filing whatsoever until almost the end of the project, and HPD, unless it was also inclusionary or mandatory inclusionary or had some other overlay, HPD would have no idea that these 420 projects exist. Now you're going to have to file this form so that at least HPD has it on their radar. It makes sense for HPD to know what's going on. Going back years, there was a preliminary application that needed to be filed. Even in an ICAP sense, there's a preliminary. So most of these programs have some sort of preliminary filing. It was a little bit odd that the Affordable New York program had nothing.
Right.
How many lenders I had to speak to where they want proof of some sort of Affordable New York eligibility, and I'm like, oh well. Luckily, our opinion letters are well respected. So we would issue an opinion letter telling the lender that the project's eligible, but unfortunately they could get nothing from HPD.
Yeah. So although you still have to file something here, I suspect the opinion letter requirement will still be present, although you'll have some at least good feeling that something was submitted and you have some record of it.
Yeah, those won't give you any real indication of eligibility. It'll still be on us to issue an opinion letter.
So we issue our firm issues, and it's Jason who works on these opinion letters that discuss the particular project that's at issue and their qualifications for the program and compliance with the program requirements, which any construction lender is going to require and HPD is going to require when you close an affordable project that confirms that the project is eligible, because that's the underwriting depends on that being true, and they underwrite it based on the exemption, and so it can be problematic if that's not in place, as you know. So what happens if I'm a developer, I didn't get my footing in, and for some reason I was bold enough to still go forward? So I didn't qualify, but I'm in the middle of construction now. Can I move forward with 485X, or have I lost my opportunity?
No, 485X will apply to any project that commenced construction June 16th, 2022 or later. So even though you commence construction and you might be in construction, you can qualify for 485X. The question will be, did you have a construction wage requirement? What size is your project? How are we going to account for failure to do that? In the past. There's an MWBE requirement now. Did you do anything with MWBEs? How are we going to account for that now? And those are things that I think will come out in the rules in how we deal with those projects that have already commenced construction, and what are we going to do when they didn't know that these requirements were going to.
The application fee, since we're talking about fees, because the application fee previously was $3,000 for every single unit in the building. That's changed somewhat. So I just wanted to get your.
Yeah, so the $3,000 per unit fee now only applies to small rental projects. So those are projects of 10 units or less. And an interesting, there are actually two typos in the application fee section of the statute. One is that any 420 or 485X project of 10 units or less has a fee of $3,000 per unit. The next tier, which would be $4,000 per unit, according to the statute, applies to projects of more than 11 units. So 11 units is forgotten here. But my assumption is, because small rental projects are 10 units or less, is that the $4,000 fee is meant to apply to projects of 11 units or more. So I think 11, So 11 units to 99 units and home ownership projects are $4,000 per unit. Projects of 100 units or more are $5,000 per unit. The other typo in here is that it seems that, so it specifically talks about home ownership projects being $4,000 per unit, but then when it refers to some other like the $5,000 per unit, it talks about just 100 units or more. It doesn't say rental units or more. So there's an inconsistency here, but I think if you read between the lines, it's meant to be rental. So all homeownership projects are 4,000 per unit. And then depending on the size of your rental project, you might have a different fee.
So let's now talk about if you have an existing space and you want to add to that, can those types of projects get 485X benefits?
Sure. So while 485X and 421A before it really were new construction programs, there is the possibility for an existing building to be expanded and renovated and get 485X benefits. Those are called eligible conversions. And if at least 51% of the floor area of the project is new floor area, then you're still eligible for 485X. That can be through demolition of existing floor area or just building new floor area on top of whatever's existing, or some combination of the two. Then you can be eligible for 485X as well.
If you're above that threshold and then you demolish to get below the threshold,
Yeah.
Is there a waiting period, or can you just demolish and then immediately go forward?
So the only waiting period would be if you demolished residential units. If you were going to demolish, a commercial building, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the replacement ratio, which also existed under Affordable New York, so this isn't a change. There's a replacement ratio where if you demolish or an existing residential unit, and it doesn't have to be an occupied residential unit, it could be any existing residential unit. If you demolish it, you have to replace it with an affordable unit. So some of those sites that you might be looking at that have a decent amount of residential units on there now, you have to be careful because that may require you to supply more than the 20 or 25% affordable that you might be thinking.
Yeah. And is there a look back period for that replacement value?
It's 3 years.
It's 3 years. So, you may have owned the land for a year. Maybe there was a demolition a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's important when you're looking at properties to take a look to see what was on there before, so you know what your replacement value is.
Yes, absolutely.
Your replacement number, rather, is. What else can we talk about, and what other things do you find important to discuss or to tell our Skyliners, which you so aptly named our listeners, so that they have more information and about the program?
So two basics I'll just finish up on. One is that the 12% commercial, community facility, and accessory use space still applies. So up to 12% of your space can be commercial, community facility, or accessory use, and all that space can still be included in your 485X application. So, right, you can have a definitely a commercial or retail component on the building.
But if you have more than that, don't forget about ICAP.
Don't forget about ICAP. That's a common part of our practice where we will subdivide a building into condominium tax lots so that a portion can get 485X and a portion can get ICAP.
So you're covered.
Yes. So every square foot is covered by some sort of abatement or exemption program. The last thing I think important to touch on are just the deadlines that we're talking about. So 485X is available to projects that commence construction between June 16th, 2022 and June 15th, 2034. So we're getting 10 years of a new program, which I think is, I think it's the longest that these types of programs have ever been extended. So that's exciting news. Programs that apply for 485X need to complete construction by June 15th of 2038.
Yeah.
So that's the completion deadline we're talking about here.
Obviously, this all works very well together with MIH. MIH doesn't work without it, and it's a very important program for us as housing developers. The trade-off was good cause eviction, which is a terrible name. Everybody says so, including myself, and it's really just universal rent stabilization. They obviously tapered it down a ton from what it originally was when it was introduced in 2019 and how it's been pushed by progressives in Albany. That was the trade-off.
New construction projects are exempt from the good cause eviction requirements for 30 years.
Yeah.
So anybody constructing a building under 45X, and most buildings constructed under 421A or the older program, would be exempt from these good cause eviction requirements.
Yeah. That's obviously good news, and it makes sense because it would really undercut the program even further. So
Agreed.
The program in some aspects is not as good as the prior program. In some respects it is, depending on the size of your project. So it's going to be doing, I think, good things for the city. And overall, I'm very pleased. I think you are too. And we're now at this point overrun with lots of clients contacting us and trying to understand this program. I urge everyone who has any questions about this, ICAP, or any other tax exemptions to contact Jason. But Jason, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me once again. I'm
Yeah.
always happy to be here.
And if you guys like this episode, share it, like it, subscribe, call Jason. Not that he has a lot of time because his phone is probably going to be busy. It's going to be like one of those hotlines that charge you $1 a minute. But, shoot him an email. He'll respond to you. We're always looking to work on new projects and happy to discuss and talk with everybody out there who's working on housing in NYC.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jason.
All right, thanks, David.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@seidenschein.com or visit our website at seidenschein.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@seidenschein.com and Bieslakowski at seidenschein.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.